Hello and good evening. Hopefully everyone's having a great day so far. Welcome back to another episode of Have Game Will Travel. I am your host, Bennett. I'm also the Director of Esports Growth and Development here at Full Sail University. If this is your first time watching Have Game Will Travel, the show is all about how there's so much more to gaming, streaming, and esports than just, being good at the game. So we take a virtual journey through our guests, journey through the industry. If you have been here before, you can ask questions live. If you're watching on a VOD, thanks for watching. But let's get right into the action today. And welcome, Annabelle. How are you today?
Hello, hello. I am doing well, forgetting what day of the week it is already because that's just the nature of the job, right?
Yep,
But I'm
absolutely.
doing fantastic.
Well, welcome. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and all that.
Yeah. So for those of you who may not know who I am, I'm Annabelle. I also go by Euny on Twitter and also obviously gaming as it is. But I work at Evil Geniuses. I'm a marketing project coordinator there, and a lot of what I do when I'm not working is working with students. I'm a former student leader myself in collegiate esports, so I love answering questions about how to get a job, where to get started, all that good stuff.
I love it. Yeah, it's a pretty cool thing. We're here in Orlando, and you graduated and help kind of found the program over at UCF. So we've had some battles back and forth, but we're excited to have you here today. So how did you kind of get your start in gaming?
Oh gosh. So going back, however long it was, I grew up playing games with my family. So a lot of the time that I spent, as free time was on the GameCube.
Yep.
And then eventually that became the Wii. And it kept going on and on. And I ended up getting into PC gaming. And so a lot of high school for me was playing League of Legends with my group. We would always get a 5-man together and just queue it up after school. So like for me, gaming was not only just a hobby, but it was also part of my social life.
Yeah.
And so it's always been very important to me, even as I considered what I wanted to do for a career to get started.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that kind of bond between friends, growing up and continuing to play has obviously carried over in so many people that, the industry has just continued to grow bigger and bigger every year. Obviously, when you talk about growing up and gaming, the thing that I always talk about was when my parents got me, the Sega 32X, which was like that thing that you put on top of the Sega, and it came with Doom, and that was like the first game that I like was totally head over heels for. What was the first game that you like truly ever like loved?
Oh gosh. I would have to say, like, if we're gonna go all the way back, probably Animal Crossing for the Wii. I
Hmm.
played the GameCube version, but I think it was the City Folk version.
Okay.
I really enjoyed that. I used to play Kirby's Epic Yarn with my dad too when I was a lot younger. And it was always this thing of like, stop running off the edge of the screen. Like we need to get all the gems, like stop dying. Like so I have a lot of good memories of that time period where we would just buy like new Wii games and like give them
Yeah.
a shot. And it was like a really great bonding time after school, after dinner was done, sit down, let's play some video games.
Yeah. Did you think when you were younger that you would have a career in this industry, or is that something that kind of like took shape later on in life?
I definitely, growing up, was very much raised to be like, not necessarily raised, but it was something that I was interested in and my parents supported me. I wanted to be an engineer. Like I wasn't sure, what I wanted to do, but my dad was an engineer. Like I always grew up around that, and I really enjoy like science. I did science Olympiad in middle school, so it was very much like going into high school, I was going to get prepped for college, and then I
Yeah.
was going to go and like get an engineering degree. And that, I mean, that's what I started out with initially in college.
Was
Um,
gaming your first passion, or was there other things that you did as well? We talked to a lot of people that were really into sports when they were younger, and then eventually transitioned into the gaming space. What about you?
I will say like gaming was always a constant. I definitely tried different things. Like I did tennis, and then when I was younger, I also, like I said, I did like science Olympiad. I was like a
Right.
very nerdy child growing up, so a lot of like studying and a lot of having fun with my friends. Like we would get to travel to UCF for science Olympiad and
Hmm.
compete. And like I think for me that was a lot of academics, but also like a lot of gaming. Like those are the two constants
Yeah.
for me for sure.
And obviously, being here in Orlando and then traveling to UCF for stuff like that, was that your first taste of what UCF had to offer and kind of sealed the deal on where you wanted to go to school?
I definitely, looking back, like, it's so nostalgic because we would travel and then we would go and like all of our events were in the science buildings and engineering buildings. So when I finally came to campus and I was like considering going to UCF, I was like, I remember this. Like, oh, there used to be a parking lot here and now there's a building. Like, it's definitely super nostalgic because I always grew up like around UCF. And so then when I ended up going there, it just kind of made sense. And I got to stay near my family and my high school too is also local to Orlando. So yeah.
Very cool. And tell us about what you studied when you attended UCF.
I switched my major 2 times. So we'll go through the, start to finish. So I started, I was in the honors college. And so I started in this dual degree, which UCF I don't know if they offer it now, but it was the biomedical engineering option where you would pick one engineering discipline and you would pick biomedical science and the technical electives would be covered by the other major. So I came in and I was doing biomed and I was doing electrical engineering at the time. And because I had dual enrolled at Valencia, like, again, I was a super nerd. So I finished high school with my associates. So I basically came in and like immediately I was like taking like Chem 2 and Physics 2 and like Calc 3 and like all this crazy stuff as a freshman, which like looking back, like I don't know how I survived that. That probably contributed to it a little bit. But after I watched Worlds, and this is kind of like how I got interested in esports in the first place. I watched Worlds in 2018. And that's when Cloud9 made it all the way, I think, to semis. So I would be up at 5 a.m. in my dorm at UCF. My friends would come over, like we'd make pancakes, and we were watching Cloud9 play. I was a huge Cloud9 fan at the time. And I was like, this engineering thing, I was struggling through like finals. Like I was like, this engineering thing, like I could do it, but I'm not enjoying it. So then I was like, screw it. I'm going to get involved in like the on-campus stuff, and I'm going to switch to computer engineering. And then I was like, computer engineering is also not working out. So I ended up picking radio television. And I was like, if I cannot get a job in esports, because I was fully committed at this point. I had made the decision. I was like, I'm going to work in esports. If I cannot get a job, I will work as a PA. I will do whatever I have to. I will be a gaffer, whatever it takes. Like, and I will work in broadcast. So that was kind of my plan by the time I hit junior year. Yeah.
Well, it worked out, so that's great news, right?
I didn't have to be a PA. Yay! Like I made it. But I'm definitely the kind of person who wanted to have a plan.
Yeah.
And so that was my plan.
And you really built an incredible foundation to that plan. Obviously, you became the esports director for the Gaming Knights. Talk to us a little bit about the different programs that UCF had at the time, I guess, and maybe you can speak on now as well. But I know how they had the intramural and they had the Gaming Knights that you would like feed into esports at UCF. So maybe talk to the audience here a little bit about just kind of the different things that made up esports at UCF.
For sure. And I think for some of the viewers, if you are familiar with collegiate esports, there's so many different like types and formats for clubs. So it definitely gets confusing. And so I will try to simplify it and explain the history. So when I first was interested in esports, the first thing I did was go to a LAN that Gaming Knights hosted. And I met a lot of people. And at that time, Gaming Knights was like the gaming club. Like there was one gaming club and it was Gaming Knights. And so Gaming Knights did casual events like the LANs, and they had an esports branch. And the esports branch was known as esports at UCF. You can see where we're going here. So I ran for esports director, which was an officer position. And so I became a member of the officer board. So for 2019 to 2020, I served as the esports director. I think we had about 80 competing students at the time. So it was a lot. There were a lot of teams. And so we tried to do a lot with like the structure. And my role there was not only to support the club in general, but also to manage this branch. And we were also an official sport club. So that came with a lot more requirements like budget hearings, going to monthly meetings, like requesting travel funds. So there's quite a lot of stuff going on at that point. And I had brought in the secretary to assist me. And so there were 2 people kind of working on this like esports branch from an officer perspective. And we had staff and we were kind of like expanding it. And we noticed like the infrastructure wasn't necessarily working. And we felt like we wanted to give more to the competing students. And so March of 2020, which is a doomed month,
Yeah.
as all of us can remember.
Yep.
We made the call to split the clubs and make esports at UCF its own club.
Okay.
And so during that time, we went off to spring break and never came back. And so that was a crazy experience, having, decided around that time and like figuring out how to file all the paperwork, and like sport clubs helped us a lot with that. And so we became the esports sport club. Like esports at UCF was our name, and we from then on just had to like figure out what to do. Right.
Yeah, and all while you're still a student, right? Like
Yes.
you're maintaining your GPA and your classes. What was it like managing? Because it sounds like it was almost like a full position that you had. What was it like managing the two of those things together?
It was definitely, it felt like a part-time job. I mean, you're kind of running an organization. Some people like to say business, but I wouldn't necessarily say that esports clubs are a business. It's more like an org that, yes, you may have income, you may not. Like, it was a lot. In terms of me, like kind of jumping in, I had that like screw it moment, and I jumped into the 10-foot deep pool, not necessarily knowing how to swim. So it took a lot of learning, and I'm glad that I did it looking back. I used to be a very quiet, like reserved person. I didn't know how to talk to people. I didn't know how to advocate for myself. Like all these things I learned through trial and error. I learned how to work with people. I learned how to communicate with people. And so managing my schoolwork, like it took a lot of time management, and I'm not going to say I was good at it either. It definitely took a lot to like make sure I was taking care of myself, make sure I was still doing well in my classes, like make sure that, the club was still operating. I won't say it was, 110% efficiency, but like we kept things moving and like we kept the ship afloat. It's definitely a whole experience.
And you did quite a few things there. I mean, obviously one of the big, components of esports is competitive tournaments, and you were in charge of planning a lot of the LANs on campus. Talk to us a little bit about your tournaments that you did and just kind of that planning process.
It definitely was an amalgamation of working with the other officers there, working with the students to figure out, what is the priority of not only the student base at UCF, but if we're considering bringing other universities, if we want to invite Full Sail, if we want to invite the University of Florida, like what does that look like? At the time, TESPA was also a thing, so we had to interface with TESPA. And that LAN was supposed to be in March of 2020, and like planning all of that, like a lot came together, and we were so excited to like see it come to fruition. Worked with UCF, like we were going to get the Pegasus Ballroom, like we were going to have streams. Like there's a lot of coordination that goes into that, and a lot of talented people that go into that. We host our own server like infrastructure, or at least UCF, that's what they do when they host a LAN. So it was a lot of like coordination, and it took a lot of people to make it happen.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, obviously, prior to graduating from UCF, you kind of elevated your position in the org, if you will, and you became the vice president of risk management and co-founder of Esports at UCF. What was your responsibilities as like the VP and risk management?
So risk manager, I will start with that first. So I did explain, right, esports at UCF, we split off, we made this new club, and so we were determining what those roles would be for the officers. And so as a co-founder, I became vice president and risk manager. Risk manager was part of sport club's requirements. So as risk manager, I had to be CPR certified. I had to fill out any of our like sport club related forms, attend all the meetings. Like I was the sport club lore master. And, even after, graduating, sometimes like, I'll get questions like, hey, like sport clubs. And I'm like, I'm retired now. But anyway, so being risk manager, like I had to make sure that my players were being safe, that they were being responsible, that they were following like school guidelines. Like we wrote a code of conduct, like all of these things that help ensure that not only are our players obviously having fun and having a good time, but that they're being safe and representing UCF in the way that we wanted to be represented. As vice president, it kind of involved not only obviously supporting the president. I think a lot of people, when they hear vice president, they're just like, well, like you help the president, like we're not really sure. It was kind of my job, and I'll say obviously like all the other officers helped with this, but like building the infrastructure for staffing, that was a big priority for me. Making sure that like we weren't putting 5 people's workloads on one person, like expanding those groups, helping to create like organizational structures too. For an event operations officer, we need event staff, right? Like, how do you organize that? How do you plan events? So like, now that I am a project coordinator, it makes a lot of sense looking back that I was doing a lot of these organizational efficiency related tasks and ideating on those things. And I think my pride and joy at that time was making the junior officer program, which is, if for those that may not be in collegiate, a big problem for collegiate is student turnover, right? Like, what happens when I graduate? Like, who replaces me? Or what happens if someone no longer has the time to get an internship, or they need to, they do research, or like, people have to come and go. Like, it's part of collegiate. So my goal there was to put these students in like a mentee position and have these officers be mentors. But obviously training multiple students, right? And then when elections come around, right, these students can talk about, I have experience here, like I understand how the system works. So that program, I think, is still in implementation today. And so it gives students more resources to have teams. They have, assistant managers, or they have staff to help them. Because not only is that useful if you want to elevate yourself in the organization, it's useful for getting internships. It's useful for getting a job. If you can say, I was the assistant event coordinator and I helped manage like 5 events, and I communicated with this, partner. Like, it's tangible experience. And I think it's really important to build those infrastructures.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that kind of hands-on, approach is super important, for your resume to go out there and get that experience, because that's what most places are looking for. Like, okay, everything looks great on paper, but have you had the experience? And that's what they want, which is exactly what you guys were doing. And, obviously, esports at UCF is a student-run program, and you guys really have built like an impressive, program there. It's really great to see, and we get to see it, here at Full Sail, as it continues to go on after, you have moved on. But what sort of roadblocks did you kind of run into, and how did you overcome them as you were building out that program?
I think, and it's interesting now to be like on a Full Sail show and like talk about this, and like looking at your program and comparing ours. I think one of the biggest roadblocks, and still it continues to be a roadblock for the program, it's just recognition within the school, not necessarily like just that the program exists, but the level of excellence that they are performing at.
Right.
When we founded the club, it was around the same time that like our CSGO team, they won a national championship. And like, to think now, right, like if we did the same thing, I feel like there would be a lot more recognition. I believe like there's a student space on campus now. Like, all these things back then were a huge struggle for us. And I think we were successful in creating like a brand identity, and we created our own logo. We created our own merchandise. We have a socials account that continues to perform. Like, all of these things were super important for us to build and continue. But definitely it was hard, when you're working a lot and you're creating this, I don't want to say product, but a service for UCF students to engage in and participate in. And I think that the partnership has definitely grown between the university, but it's always those like really important connections that really help push you forward. And so I think that was definitely one of the biggest like roadblocks. And a lot of students may relate to that when you have like an esports program and you want to be proud of it. And so like, I will definitely say Full Sail, like consistently elevating like the Armada, like that's my big compliment, is like, it feels like when you're a part of the Armada, right? Like that the school recognizes you and appreciates what you're contributing, especially because esports, can't remember what the study is, but like a lot of students that participate in esports, whether it's like high school or collegiate, they're less likely to participate in other extracurriculars. And so as a school, you can reach more students than you would without it, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah,
and I think that's great. I mean, like I said, you guys had built something pretty incredible over there, and we get to continue to see it and watch it grow. And I think leaving it better for the people behind you is always an important piece of kind of that collegiate space, right? And so that's definitely something that you've really done here, which is great. What sort of advice would you give to other students that are maybe in the process of building their student-run program? What sort of advice would you give to them?
I have so much advice, but like I can't, like it's number one. Like I think the most important thing is to like remember like esports at UCF was my baby. It was like my heart and my soul, and like I loved it, and it was so hard to leave. Like, but you have to remember to like take care of yourself and remember that you're a student, and like it's something that I really love about like and we'll talk about my internships later, but like it was always school is first, like school comes first, and so you have to remember that, right? Like the core of collegiate is that you are a collegiate student, and like taking time for yourself is like really important. And I think in line with taking time for yourself is like learning how to say no and like making sure that you say no, because there are a lot of times where I would just take on like it was like piling up plates at like a sushi conveyor belt restaurant. I'm like, okay, I'll take this and I'll take this and I'll take this, and it's like you can do that, but is it good for you? And in the long run, like couldn't you just take a couple less plates and make sure that you're okay? Like I think that was something that I definitely had to learn, was like taking care of myself. And you know, like I know it's a meme that like, for example, my Rocket League players would have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for like the day, and I'm like, make sure you're eating healthy, make sure you're getting sleep. Like I remember when I used to get 6 hours of sleep and it was the worst thing ever, and now I get like 7 or 8 every night, and I'm like such a productive person. Like I think those are like right off the bat, I'm like, yes, please, students do that. And I think I'm going to say this to students and anyone else at the university, like, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to learn. Like, it's always a sign of goodwill if you're interested in learning about those things. Like, be very open and welcoming to people who may not understand. Like, recently there was an article that came out about journalists going to watch Worlds, and she's like, it's not really all that hype. Like, you know, I didn't understand it. And I'm sitting here like, I didn't grow up watching football. I don't understand football. But if someone were to explain it to me, I'm sure I would be interested. It's like, it's the same thing there. So I think that those are like off the top of my head. I'll limit myself to 3 for right now. If I have extra, I'm happy to talk about it. But yeah.
So we're going to take our first question from chat. And this is from our resident question asker, Jacob is Nachos. What are some of your biggest challenges running an esports club at the largest school in the country where traditional athletics plays such a huge role on campus? He also notes that he is a proud UCF grad, but Armada for life.
So nice. That is a really interesting question. And it also leads me to the thought that like I had a very unique opportunity because UCF is such a large school. If you think about it, if you have 5,000 or 10,000 students to choose from, the likelihood that you're going to get, you know, 5 grandmaster or 5 master, you know, players is a lot lower than if you have 60,000 students. So we are very lucky that our student population is very large, because naturally without recruiting talent, we had existing talent. You know, that's why our league team was always consistently grandmasters to challenger. That's why like our Valorant team has been doing so well. We have so many talented students there that want to compete. So I think I would say it was a great opportunity, but also very challenging because athletics is everything. Right. Like UCF is known for football, and for us to like get recognized as a sport club, we felt like as a sport club, right, which is supposed to be like the step below athletics, right? Like you're not on scholarship, but like you still want to compete, but like it's more formalized than like intramurals, right? Like where you just get, you know, bring some buddies, like let's play, you know, whatever. We always felt like we were performing at a very high level, but it was going to take a couple years for us to get that amount of funding because we were a new sport club. And so it was always a really interesting line to navigate to get like consistent results. Like our Rocket League team was always doing amazing. And for us to want them to be recognized, for us to want, you know, the same recognition as like athletics. And so we just try to replicate that like with our social media, you know, with amplifying our players. And I think time is always the hardest part, right? Like looking now, I'm like, wow, like they're getting recognized, and like, you know, people are seeing what they're doing. Like they just partnered with Addition Financial, which is like huge for them. Those things didn't seem possible 2 years ago, but they're definitely like are happening now. So the waiting game, I think, was difficult. And also, you know, again, people just didn't know that we were existed.
Like you said, it takes time sometimes, and you know, you can't necessarily rush that, right? Obviously, you've graduated now. You're out there in the esports industry working. You know, kind of to close the chapter on UCF. What's kind of been your fondest memory looking back at your time at esports at UCF?
Well, spoiler alert, it actually involves Full Sail.
All right.
So we were able to get our League of Legends team to compete. It was for the Battle for the Boulevard.
Battle of the Boulevard.
And I was definitely very close with our league teams, and it was like an opportunity for them to play like on a stage and to get that like experience of competing like on a broadcast with casters, with a host. Like that's always going to be my favorite moment, even though I think that was before esports at UCF. But it was just such a magical moment to like watch my players, like my friends, like go up on stage and compete. And I'm a sucker for league. I obviously work for a team that has a league team now.
Right.
So it's always been like very connected to me, and to just like hear like, even just like the corny stuff, like the loud music and the lights, I was eating it up. It was such a proud moment for us. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, that memory is definitely shared on our end too. And I think that, one of the great things about a place like, the Full Sail University Orlando Health Fortress is that, it's a place for everybody. I mean, even, students at UCF. And I think that open community aspect for us was really important. Even though you guys still have now won 3 Battle for the Boulevards, we're going to get it.
You are a gracious host, and we appreciate you always. That's what I'll say. And like, that kind of experience is something that obviously I hope that my students, well, they're not my students anymore, but that the students continue to get to enjoy, whether it's at Full Sail, whether it's at UCF, like fingers crossed, maybe one day. I think it's kind of like, every other sport out there, when you get to compete and like watch your team compete. Like, I never got anything out of like UCF football games, because again, I'm not like a football person, but watching us compete and like being in the crowd and like cheering for your team. Like I felt the same cheering for UCF as I did in Chicago, like cheering for EG. Like it's a very distinct feeling. So
I love that. Well, all right. So let's talk about EG. So you in 2021, you landed an internship at Evil Geniuses, and you started as a broadcast and events operation intern. First and foremost, what was it like? What did it feel like to land that? Like, that's a huge internship with a major esports org.
It was crazy, like applying and like worrying myself to death, like hoping that I would get it. And then you get the phone call and they're like, hey, like, I'm really pleased to offer you this internship. And I'm like, I need to keep it chill on the phone call. I'm like, oh my God, like I got the internship. Like, I think I really had to have confidence in myself when I applied. And like, for backstory, when I had applied to the internship, I had already been in the Genius League for a little bit, like attending workshops, resume reviews, mock interview nights. Like, I was trying to advocate for myself, and even on Twitter too, like I was building a brand around being, at that time, I was the UCF girl who was like, a collegiate student leader. And so I did kind of seem like a subject matter expert in my own way around collegiate. And that's what they were looking for. Even in the mock interview night, Greg Kim, who's at CLG now, he was at EG at the time, he was asking me about like LCS and my thoughts on that and like what I would do to improve it. And unbeknownst to me, Chris Greeley was in the call. I didn't know that. So the commissioner of the LCS was listening to me roast the LCS broadcast. But it's fine, because a lot of the things I was suggesting are now implemented. So
that's really cool.
I was right. But I really like made sure that the EG employees and staff that were there like knew that I knew what I was talking about, and that I knew, like, I felt like if I'm in this room, like with other people, like other students that are applying, like I want them to know that I'm committed and interested in this opportunity. So it was definitely crazy to be like there were 4 students that joined in my cohort, one of 4, and probably dozens and dozens of students applied. So there were a lot of late nights where I was like working on my resume and like trying to make sure that I could communicate that I was qualified. Which is funny because I ended up doing so many resume reviews later on anyway, helping other students. So it's always been a very like important experience to me.
Absolutely. And that lasted about 5 months. What sort of
Yes.
responsibilities did you have as like the broadcast and event operations intern?
So at the time we were all brand ambassadors, and now I say I was broadcast and events because that's what I specialized in. So again, I had planned if I can't get a job, I will do broadcast, right?
Right.
Like I will graduate from radio TV, and I will do it that way. So I ended up, what I would do is help the other students who were interns. If they were like planning events and they needed streams, I would stream it. So I taught myself how to stream Valorant and how to use Parsec to like pull the spectator feed and like all this stuff. So I was working on that and also planning events for the Genius League Discord and working on like larger projects as well. So at the time it was very like, you can work with some of the other interns on like larger scale projects, or you can work on your own projects. And during that time, I ended up kind of helping some of my fellow interns with like breaking down their larger projects. So I would go into our project management software and I would like set tasks, and I would set deadlines. And so my brain was kind of moving in this like, I can dissect these large things and large deliverables and make them work. And I still enjoy broadcast. I don't do it anymore, but at the time I really enjoyed like being able to build things and like learn as I was streaming, because the Genius League was always a place where it's like some students may feel like you have to at an internship deliver 100% of the time, like flawless, perfect, whatever. But the philosophy of the Genius League was if we try something, we don't get a lot of viewers or it doesn't work out, like we just won't do it again, but like at least we know and you got that experience. So like looking back, my league streams were probably not the best. I was probably not the best spectator, but like for a group of students, you know, under EG, it was like pretty high quality, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And obviously, after that 5 months, it's now June, and you applied and were able to take another internship with EG as the lead intern. What was that experience like?
So basically, my supervisor at the time had noticed that I'm like breaking down these like projects, and he's noticing like, you do a lot of project management. Like, is that something that interests you? And at the time, I was like, yeah, like I think, you know, maybe I could be good at it. I wasn't really sure, but I had already tried so many different things. I mean, collegiate, like I was like, I want to be a team manager. And then I was like, I don't want to be a team manager. Like dealing with people is difficult.
Yes.
Schedules and all this stuff, like tournament ops, like, you know, I could do whatever, but there wasn't anything that really stuck with me. It's like I enjoy it except for broadcast. And so the leadership in the Genius League were like, we'd like for you to take on this like lead intern role and really help the other students with like organizing these things and contribute to the decisions of like the direction for this program in a, I wouldn't say a large way, but at least in like an advisory capacity. And looking back on that role, I kind of call it like class president. That's kind of what it was, right? Like making sure that all of my peers were taken care of, they were okay, like if they needed help, like, and I did some administrative things like, you know, filing marketing requests and supervising the event calendar. So it was more of a administrative operations like role, and I was still able to work on a lot of projects. But you know, at that time, we also were able to do tournaments with like LG, like these really big tournaments with cool prize pools, and like it was like an amateur or like academy level like stream quality too. And so I was, you know, behind the scenes for collegiate. I was like the point of contact to help manage these tournaments, make sure like that all the interns were reaching out to the schools, communicating with the schools, making sure that like from marketing's end, like we were on the same page, like that the assets were being built out, like building the event proposals. So again, it was a lot more of a leadership oriented role. And I also got a lot more exposure within the company because I was helping as a subject matter expert for these tournaments, for these other activations, like answering their questions, because I knew my stuff, right? Like I came from collegiate. I knew what a good tournament was and what it wasn't. And so, yeah, I was able to contribute.
Yeah, and that's great. And you've had a lot of other kind of roles in your journey. I mean, I know back in like 2020, you hosted panels and you were a collegiate super coach for Play VS, and like you did all these other things. So I feel like that probably led into a lot of the stuff that you started to do now, you know, in these new roles, right?
Yeah, like I definitely through those like opportunities, like hosting panels for Play Versus, like I got to meet a lot of fantastic individuals in esports, a lot of amazing women. And learn how to speak a little bit more, like, you know, being in your role and asking those questions, like getting the information that is the most interesting, out of a guest, right? Like
Right.
I was doing that. And so I was learning how to like word myself and like how to speak to other people. And being a super coach, right? Like how do I communicate, what my students need to a tournament organizer? Like we would have round tables and we would discuss different topics, like and what's coming and like, what do you think we could improve? Like all of those different things and like being able to also network and meet people. It really kind of all amalgamated because, when I stepped into the lead intern position, which I told, how could I forget this? Like I started hosting the resume reviews that the Genius League is known for. Like I started doing networking calls with students. Like by the time that I finished that position, I had talked to probably like 50 plus students about like, how do you get a job in esports? Like doing resume reviews. I did so many of those. I've seen so many resumes. Like it became my passion during that time to help other students get a career. Even though I didn't have a full-time job, I felt like I could get one. Like I wanted other students to feel that way because when you get into esports, it can be so overwhelming that like you're just like, yeah, maybe not, right? Like I don't know where to start. Like if you want to work in radio, there's nonprofits for you to consult about how to get a job in radio.
Right.
Like, you want to work in sports, like things like that. So I felt like that was a resource I could offer.
So obviously looking at a ton of resumes for the students out there that are looking to do and get into the world of esports. Any sort of resume tips doing all of those reviews that you can share here?
Yeah. You can see my face. I'm like, let's see the top 3 things that I tell students every single time. Number 1, you can put your education at the bottom of an esport resume because your degree is not as important as your experience. I get a lot of students who feel like I don't have a marketing degree, so I can't work in marketing, or like I don't have X degrees, so I can't work in this. Your experience is so much more important than whatever degree you get. Your degree is a bonus. I think that's like the most common thing I tell to students all the time. Number 2, just because you weren't paid for it doesn't mean that you can't put it down as experience.
Absolutely.
Whether you're a student leader, whether you're a volunteer, whether you make something yourself, like just because you didn't get paid for it doesn't mean that you didn't do the work. So 100% like put that down. Don't minimize any of the work that you did. And number 3, whether retroactively or like currently, like start a Word doc, like everything that you've worked on so that you don't forget because things get crazy busy, and like always include the scale of things that you worked on. Because if you say, I worked with tournament organizers to, register my students or all of these things, or like I managed teams, right? Like teams could be 2, it could be 15, like who knows how much work that you did, right? Like if you were in charge of students, like saying that you're in charge of a program with 100 students is like, that packs some punch, right? So I think that's my speed run of like things that I tell students all the time because they don't know, right? Because no one's telling them those things. So esports is so unique because your resume and 90% of the time is not going through the automated word checker, like looking for, like in tech or things like that. So there is a human element there. And so you have to really learn how to sell yourself.
Yeah, that's definitely important. One question that was from another question from earlier talking about managers comes from Diego, and they say, what advice would you give to other managers?
Managers. So managers is a fun word. If you mean team management, I would say always just keep taking steps to elevate yourself. You can start in collegiate as a team manager. Let's say you're interested in league, right? You manage your college's League of Legends team. That's a great start, but not necessarily enough to get you into the LCS, right? So you got to find the in-between there, right? Maybe start managing an academy, or not academy, amateur team, right? Or some team that's competing in Proving Grounds, and then you move to academy. Like you have to kind of think about the progression of where can I take my next step and learn more, right? And thinking about also how you interface with your team is super important, right? How do you manage people? And that moves me to just managing people in general. Communication is so important. Talking to people is so important. It's okay to over communicate sometimes while you're learning how someone communicates, and then use that method, right? Like I have some people who respond immediately on Slack, right? Like all the time. And this applies to my current job too. I have some people who are going to email me for everything, and I'm super appreciative of that. And I learned how to manage my email so that I get all that information. Like and just talking to people and learning how to talk to people is super important. And like how to give feedback too is like super important, right? Like even just things like asking for permission to give feedback, right? Like you don't just walk up to someone and be like, hey, your food sucks, right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
wait, can I give you some feedback on how you cooked your food? And then you can say you didn't cook the chicken enough, right? Like if they don't want to hear it, like when you say it, they're still not gonna want to hear it. So like at least you saved yourself some time. But yeah, that was super long-winded, but like I have a lot of experience like learning how to talk to people, and a lot of times where I just took a massive L because I didn't know how to communicate to people. If I could go back, it's like my third eye has opened. I'm sure I could communicate a lot better, but like you just got to keep learning and asking for feedback, and asking to give feedback too. Like,
yeah,
those are really important.
Yeah, for sure. I think, being able to give that feedback when they accept that invitation, right, is definitely, key to continuing to that growth of that relationship that you're building with, whether it's a player or somebody else that you're managing, is going to be, a key component to that. But in 2022, you kind of completed the trifecta and landed the full-time gig at Evil Geniuses as the marketing project coordinator. So obviously congratulations on that. But not, not every, intern and person that was there at EG was offered a full-time gig. So what sort of advice would you give to other students who are looking to make an impact when they are, doing an internship?
I think number one, and this is not necessarily that you can control, right?
Right.
I had supervisors who were super amazing and like made space for me to speak when they knew that I could answer. Just because my supervisor could answer the same question about why, UCF has such a like cool athletics program and like why they don't, and I'm like, actually we do have esport, like I'm able to answer that question, and I'm the newer person in the room. And so maybe people don't know me. And so my supervisors advocated for me to be that person and to gain trust and show that I knew what I was doing. And so I'm forever like grateful for that. Like shout out to Sab. She's at Riot now. But having those people is super important. And, I will always encourage programs, whether it's a company with an internship program, whether it's a university, like advocate for your students, because they 90% of the time they know what they're talking about, right? Like they need an opportunity to not only gain confidence, right? Like I was super nervous when I was speaking up, but I realized looking back that it allowed me to prove, right, that I should be here, right? That I knew what I was talking about. I think for me too, it was like I always made sure to not necessarily go above and beyond, but like to make sure that I was owning my work. And also same thing for me with the interns that technically I was a student class president. I hate saying I was in charge of the other interns, but making sure that they were getting opportunities and that I wasn't eating up all the work and that I was delegating appropriately and showing that I understand how to be a leader was super important. And, I would build out things like in our project management software because I had an interest in it, but I also made sure to make it useful. And like I never did anything without the intention of learning. And so by the time that I was ready to graduate, I also like made sure that I had confidence in myself to be like, hey, like, can I expect a job offer? And going through the offer and negotiation process, like I always had to remember that like I have the experience. And if I'm not going to stay at that company and I did everything on my side, like to prove that I am valuable to that company, it's whatever, right? Like I'm going to go get a job somewhere else, and reassuring myself in that way is super important. And like my friends who interned at EG and are not at EG now because they didn't get an offer, they've still landed at amazing places. Like our conversion rate from intern to full-time esports job is amazing. We have students at not students, but graduates at Gen G, ESL. Like my friend Tim, while he didn't get picked up initially, is now at ESL doing what he loves, talking about fighting games, working on DreamHack. Like I'm so proud of him. Like we're all gonna land somewhere, and like you just have to remember that, even if it's not immediately like it was for me. I always tell people like I'm the lucky case, right? Like I got offered a job and immediately converted, but that doesn't necessarily mean everyone will. Like, and you don't have to replicate my path to get to where you want to be.
Right. And that network that you've built just in that area of interns that are now all working at other places. I mean, that's a huge advantage for you in your future career. You know, if it goes elsewhere, that you've got, you know, people in all these different places that you can you know, lean on, which is always good.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, obviously with COVID, you know, we weren't going out and like doing stuff, but like going to DreamHack Dallas and going to LCS Chicago because of work, like DreamHack Dallas, people would walk up looking for me because I said I would be there, and they would come to the booth, and my supervisors were like, "Are you internet famous? Like, what is going on? Why are people asking for you?" And I was like, because I have an extensive network in collegiate and people know who I am. I went from the UCF collegiate girl to now I'm at EG, but like I still love collegiate and I have all these connections in collegiate, and I'm just so excited to travel more. Like I'm excited to meet more people that I've known and met through this industry, because it is such a like connecting thing. It's so important to all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
And you are a rock star of that, you know, as someone that you know helped build that program at UCF, and now you're out there in the industry. I mean, that's a huge thing for a lot of students that they'll go and look and say, "Hey, I want to do that," you know, and so that's a pretty cool thing. So tell us what it's like, you know, a day in the life of the marketing project coordinator for EG.
So if I had to explain to my peers what my job is, I work under the marketing operations team, which is under marketing at Evil Geniuses. And our job is to be like the first line of defense for any request that comes in for any like creative assets that anyone is going to need, whether it's partnerships, whether it's gaming, whether it's culture, whether it's factor. Like we help to manage that pipeline and also delegate it and make sure that everything is being produced as like it's being requested, that it's on time. So 50% of my job is supporting our other project managers in the marketing ops team. So I take on smaller projects. I help, like, for example, with the Genius League, every time a request comes in from them, I take care of that. So that's kind of what I do for half of my job. I get to work on cool stuff like figuring out the activation for PAX West. Right. And then I got to go staff the booth. So my second time at PAX, I was like an exhibitor and I got the badge. That was really cool. And then the other half of my job is super boring to a lot of people. I do a lot of budget work. I do invoice filing. I do vendor paperwork processing and contracts and all that stuff, but it's what helps to keep the ship run. So we can do cool stuff like making videos about our teams and like doing activations on site so that you can meet our players, or, you know, going to LCS Chicago and like, I didn't, you know, work on that project specifically, but our department does, and like building out the custom pinball machine and like all the cool stuff that the fans see. Like marketing ops has probably touched like all of it, right? Because that's part of our job. So.
And that's cool. And you mentioned traveling like a lot. Do you have any kind of like favorite memories so far from, you know, traveling in this industry?
Oh, it's got to be LCS. After we won in Houston, I was still an intern, so I was watching from home. And when Danny did the pentakill, I was like screaming in my office at home, and like I was like, Chicago's gonna be so great because I get to watch us play. Like I cried in Chicago when Dyrus came out. I was like, oh my God, because I'm like, I'm a League fan. And so I got to experience the thing that I love the most as a fan for work. Like I got to go work our booth. I got to meet fans. Like I got to say I work for EG, and people were like, that's so cool. Like, so it is a dream job in that essence. Yes.
And that's pretty cool to have that, you know, to be able to go somewhere and do something that you're truly passionate about. You know, it really changes kind of that mentality in your mind of like, oh, this is work. You're like, no, it's fun. I'm enjoying this. Like, yeah, it's challenging, right? But there's so much passion involved in what you guys are doing that it really kind of takes it to the next level. So a question that we ask all of our guests here on the show is, what do you think is like the a common misconception people have about esports?
I'm gonna try and think of a less common one, but
Okay.
I think a lot for students, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that, your guests have probably said this before, but like esports is not, and this is probably the theme of the show too, it's not just play, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not just the players. Like, I'm probably gold in League of Legends, but that doesn't mean that anyone else can do my job better than I can.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like there is so much more than just the competitive aspect. Like students don't even realize the amount of opportunities that are out there. I didn't think that, until senior year, like, and my professors were like, why do you say that you want to be a project manager on your resumes when we're doing resume reviews for your final? Like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, because that's what I enjoy and there's a space for me there. And like, it is to the point too where for Evil Geniuses we don't just recruit in industry, like we bring in people from other industries, not only just because it's important to have the diverse viewpoints, but
Right.
like because until we have more formalized pipelines for talent, like if a student doesn't know that they can work in partnerships at an esports org, they might just go into traditional partnerships.
Yeah.
And what are we going to do about that? So I think there's so much like opportunity, and also like to be a fan and participate, the gap is so much smaller in esports than it is in traditional sports, I feel like sometimes. Like, and I think that it's super important to remember that like I can just go home and play League of Legends, but yeah, like we have a team and I can enjoy that
Yeah.
too and like be connected to it in that way. So a little bit cliche, but like that's always my thing, is like you can get a job in sports if you really care about it. And it doesn't matter like where you come from, what your traditional background is. Like anyone can realistically make the pivot. It might take a while, it might not take a while, but like if you want to make that decision, you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that leads into this next question because, obviously the industry is growing, right? And you just talk about that, of how it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that has this esports background to come in, because you want viewpoints from all aspects, right? What sort of, advice do you give to students that are like at that moment, they're graduating this month, they really want to get into esports? What advice do you give them?
Definitely learning how to format your experience in a way that is going to communicate what you want to recruiters. I always tell students that your experience is like going to the grocery store and you see all the produce there. Like you have so much to pick from, but it's about picking the correct things, preparing them in the correct way, and presenting it to a company. You have to, I don't want to say cook the right dish, but you have to frame
Right.
it in a certain way. There's so many things that you could do with like a tomato, right? Like you gotta frame it properly. So if you are applying for like a partnerships position and you don't necessarily have experience with partnerships, but you do have a lot of customer service experience, you have worked in your collegiate esport org and you've communicated with like a lot of people and you have those skills, like don't minimize it just because your job didn't say partnerships, right? Like there there's so much that every student has done that they discount
Right.
themselves for, I feel like. So I think that that's really important, and just building your network, right? Like, and knowing people, right? Like I tell students all the time that reach out to me, like if you're looking for a social media position and I see one, like I'll send it to you, right? Like I'll send it to you, like I'll remember to do that.
Right.
Even just like on Twitter, like make a Twitter account, start following people, start talking about whatever it is that you're passionate about. And like esports is such a, we're still small, but we're growing, but that means that everyone is interconnected in some way. Like when you reached out to me and I was like, I am so excited to do this. Like it's about who you know and like reaching out to them. And it's not necessarily about who you know in like a bad way. It's like, but opportunities
Yeah.
will find a way to your doorstep if you continue to meet people. So
Yeah, I always look at it as kind of like the spreading of knowledge, like being
mhm.
able to share your ideas and the experiences that you've had in your journey so far, right? And I think that's a really important thing that a lot of students are just starting to get, right? And they're coming into that where, okay, I've had this experience. Now, what's next? How do I build that kind of first stepping stone into this industry? So. Well, good. Well, thank you so much. Obviously for being here, talking to everybody on the show. I want to give you some time to kind of share where people can find you if they have questions, they want to, talk to you, send you their resume, all of the things. Where would they find you?
Yeah. So first off, I love, again, like talent development. I love helping students. My LinkedIn is Annabel Zinn, and I'm sure you can see my name on the screen. If you add me or request to connect with me on LinkedIn, I will just say, like, include a message if you can, like, please, because so many people will just send empty connections, and I'm like, what do you need? Like, what do you want from me? Um,
Yeah.
I'm always happy to talk to you about how to get into a career, or forward you to someone who knows a lot more about your chosen career field. You can find me on Twitter at Euny. If you search EG Annabelle, it should come up, and you can follow me on Twitter. Sometimes I post about esports in general. Sometimes I just post about my general life. I really enjoy cooking. I love playing games, like, so I post about that too. Um, and yeah, like, please continue to support EG if you're an EG fan. You know, follow at Evil Geniuses. I'm very excited for 2023. I'm super happy to be a part of EG and continue to watch us grow. So please keep an eye out. And like, obviously, we made it into Valorant, so like,
Yes,
I'm so
congrats.
excited. I get to pass by the little spike that says "Welcome to VCT International" every day that I walk into the office.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah.
Very cool. Well, our very next episode is actually going to be next week on November 3rd with the co-owner of D20 Deathmatch, show host and ambassador for the Gamers, and Full Sail associate course director Becca Caustic Phoenix Godsey at 5 p.m. right here on the Full Sail Armada channel. Up next is going to be All Access, so stick around and we will see you guys soon.